I'm Dom Nicholls, and this is Ukraine the Latest. Today, as Donald Trump arrives in Britain for his second state visit, we report how he may have brought a gift to Ukraine in the form of weapon sales to Europe through the Pearl funding mechanism. We hear how Russia may be close to cutting oil output due to Ukrainian drone strikes, and later we have an interview with Jack Lopresti, the former Conservative MP who is now a member of Ukraine's International Legion.
Bravery takes you through the most unimaginable hardships to finally reward you with victory.
Russia does not want peace.
Erstens, wir verteidigen mit unserer Hilfe für die Ukraine auch unsere Freiheit und unsere europäischen Werte.
If I'm president, I will have that war settled in one day, 24 hours.
We are with you, not just today or tomorrow, but for 100 years.
Nous ne pouvons pas, comme Européens, laisser gagner la Russie en Ukraine.
Nobody's going to break us. We're strong. We're Ukrainians.
It's Wednesday, the 17th of September, 3 years and 207 days since the full-scale invasion began, and today I'm joined by Telegraph reporter Eliza Winter. I started with the latest from Ukraine. Not a huge amount today, to be perfectly honest, but let's go through them. Let's start in the northeast of Ukraine, around Kupiansk, the city up in the northeast, about 100 k's east of Kharkiv. It's still under extreme pressure. No huge movement there yesterday. There was a little bit, but I mention it again just to draw people's attention to it. Been speaking about it for a little while, but we do need to keep an eye on that. It is under huge pressure. Otherwise, next to no movement along the rest of the front line. There is a little bit of pushing and pulling up and down the line, but nothing huge. However, I would draw your attention to today's British military intelligence daily update on Twitter. It says Pokrovsk is still the focal point for the Russian military operations. They say this is an important defensive linchpin constraining the wider Russian advances. Some people call it strategic, which obviously it gets a lot of people excited because saying something's a strategic town, it's quite a big deal. I wouldn't call Pokrovsk strategic in that its loss irrevocably undermines the defence of Ukraine, but it is a significant point, which is why the British military update calls it a defensive linchpin, I suppose. Anyway, they say, this is MOD here in London, major elements of Russian naval infantry have been transferred from the Kursk sector and Sumy regions to Pokrovsk. An interesting admission. If that is accurate, which I think it is, knowing the people that produced this analysis, that kind of suggests that Russia has sort of given up on the Sumy push, which was the great push of the summer, if you remember. Anyway, they say that naval infantry have been pushed from Kursk and Sumy to Pokrovsk, and also to shore up the Dobrapia effort. Dobrapia being just north of Pokrovsk. That was where that lozenge sort of extended out north, that Russian push a few weeks ago that was contained and is slowly being attrited. Now, I don't know if this diversion of naval infantry means that Russia are trying to get their people back in good order. I doubt it. They haven't really shown that sort of interest in the past, so maybe they're trying to reinforce that area. You should never reinforce failure. That's not a good military policy. Reinforce success, not failure. So I don't quite know what they're doing there. Maybe they're still pushing for Pokrovsk. It is what they've been going after for months, so perhaps that's what Russia's doing, but it seems like there's a lot more forces on the way there. We will keep an eye on that, obviously. Now, elsewhere, the British Ministry of Defence assessment says that Liman, so that's the town a little further north, still in Donetsk Oblast, Liman remains an objective also. They note it was retaken by Ukraine in September 2022, the counterattack then. Defence intelligence says the majority of the Serebryansk forest, that's to the southeast of Liman, is in Russian hands, and Russian troops are consolidating positions along the Seversky Donets River. That's a little bit further to the east and the southeast of the forest. So that sector as well, Liman, is under increased pressure. Now, down a little bit to the southwest, that area where Dnipropetrovsk Oblast meets Donetsk and Zaporizhia Oblast, we've spoken about it recently in a few weeks. That area there, where it all meets, that's still very much contested. But in the vicinity of the village of Sosnivka, that's in Dnipropetrovsk Oblast, MOD here saying that Russian forces have penetrated there as deep as 10 kilometres, but on a narrow front. So, as we've seen, trying to exploit with these small groups of people pushing forward that then try to group together. So it does seem to have an effect in as much as the line seems to change, but whether or not it is then effective, it doesn't seem to be the case. However, it's happened, so we report it. Now, inside Ukraine, across the whole country, Ukraine's Air Force said that yesterday Russian forces had launched 172 Shahed attack and decoy drones, along with an Iskander-M ballistic missile and an S-300 anti-aircraft guided missile. 34 drones and 2 of the missiles got through, hitting 13 locations across the country. It had been reported 3 killed. I've seen that up to 5 now. 5 killed, over 50 injured across the country as a result of strikes yesterday. It's thought that 4 people were injured in yesterday's strike on the National University of Pharmacy in Kharkiv, where we spoke live to Latika Bork yesterday. So do listen to the start of yesterday's pod to hear the sort of on-the-ground assessment from Latika. Now, interesting, railway infrastructure was also hit last night. This reporting comes from Ukrainian railways. I say it's interesting because there seems to be an increased tempo of attacks by Russia on Ukrainian rail lines recently. We know that some trains are now having to run on alternative routes. Some have even been delayed, which hardly ever happens across the Ukrainian network. Whether Russia sees this as a logistic means of supply, we're not sure, but I just have noted the uptick in the last couple of weeks, really. Now, a couple more stories. Reuters have an interesting story. They say Russia is close to cutting oil output due to the ongoing Ukrainian drone attacks. 3 industry sources speaking to Reuters said yesterday that Russia's oil pipeline monopoly Transneft has warned producers that they may have to cut output following this campaign of drone attacks on the critical ports and refineries. As we've been reporting, Ukrainian drones have hit at least 10 refineries. I think that's a conservative estimate, but 10 refineries, cutting refining capacity by almost a fifth at one point. Obviously, they repair these things, but it has had an effect. It's damaged Russia's leading Baltic Sea ports of Ust-Luga and Primorsk. We reported that, citing data from Ukrainian military officials and Russian industry sources. Now, Russian authorities have not publicly commented on the extent of any damage or the impact on production and exports, but Transneft, which handles more than 80% of all the oil extracted in Russia, has in recent days restricted the oil firm's ability to store oil in its pipeline system. This comes from 2 of the industry sources speaking to Reuters. Transneft issued a statement after Reuters put this out and said the appearance of such fake news with reference to some unnamed sources in the Russian fuel and energy complex causes damage to the image of Transneft. So I guess everything's fine then. Anyway, we'll put a link in the episode notes to that Reuters story. Another one to bring you. Yulia Navalny, widow of murdered Russian opposition leader Alexei Navalny, said this morning that laboratories in 2 unnamed Western countries have concluded that her husband was killed by poisoning. You'll remember Alexei Navalny died last year, February the 16th, 2024, in a penal colony in Kharp, beyond the Arctic Circle, thousands of miles up in Siberia. He'd been serving the latest lengthy prison sentence handed down by Russian authorities. So the Kyiv Independent running a story today reporting that Mrs. Navalny said that her husband's team had managed to secure biological samples of her deceased husband and have got them out for analysis abroad. So in a video statement, she said laboratories in at least 2 countries, independently of each other, conducted research on these samples. Alexei had been killed specifically by poisoning. She went on to accuse Western governments of slowing down any investigation for political reasons. She urged the laboratories to publish their findings. I mean, it is tough for the Western governments to get involved there in a meaningful way, but she's entitled to her opinion. She said, a Russian citizen was killed on Russian territory. All the evidence is also there. Western countries have no legal grounds to initiate and pursue criminal proceedings. And then there are political reasons. She presented testimony from 5 employees, or people we were told were 5 employees of the penal colony, which she said helped reconstruct the details of her husband's death. One of them, a senior inspector, Anton Nemtsov, said that Mr. Navalny had complained of feeling unwell during a walk and had been returned to his cell, later collapsed, carried unconscious into the medical centre where resuscitation was started more than 40 minutes after his collapse. Then another staff member, a man called Ruslan Tsoy, who was the deputy head of the medical unit, said that the medical people had diagnosed convulsive syndrome and sudden death syndrome. You'll remember Mr. Navalny rose to prominence by exposing corruption through his anti-corruption foundation. He was repeatedly arrested and locked up, had numerous assassination attempts. He was poisoned by Novichok in 2020. after his death last year, Putin said that he had actually agreed to exchange Mr. Navalny for prisoners, mostly, we are told, Russian spies held in Western countries. Whether or not that's true, we've absolutely no idea. But Putin at the time said, unfortunately, what happened, happened. Anyway, not an uncontroversial figure, but, a brave man, I think, in my opinion. I've read his book. Yes, so there we go. Now, just last one from me. New open source news site Visegrad24 reporting just in the last hour that Sweden has announced it's going to raise its military spending from the current figure of 2.4% of GDP now up to 2.8% next year, then up to 3.1% in 2028, and eventually by 2030 up to 3.5% of GDP. I mean, that is a lot of money in any currency in any size of your economy. 3.5%. That is the NATO figure. 3.5% on heavy metal and 1.5% on additional defence spending, which covers a multitude of sins. I'm told, actually, that combined 5%, the Trump administration will slowly put the pressure on for that to be considered the minimum for the whole heavy metal side of it, which doesn't quite sit with where the US spending on defence is at the moment, but we will watch out for that. However, back to this point, interesting that Sweden, obviously neutral a couple of years ago, and then you have the Russian invasion of Ukraine, and Sweden applies to and does join NATO and ramps its defence spending up to 3.5% of GDP. Yet another strategic calculation Vladimir Putin, I think, had not taken into account before launching the full-scale invasion. Anyway, now then, Ukraine State Border Guard Service spokesperson Andrei Demchenko, speaking this morning, said that Russian troops have started to leave Belarus. That's one of the locations for the Zapad 25 exercises that have been going on just recently. Speaking to Ukrainian Pravda, he said, I can't say right now that the Russian troops have all left Belarus, but I hope they will continue moving in the right direction. So, Eliza, delighted to welcome you to the pod. On that note from Mr. Demchenko and Zapad 25, what's the latest with the exercise that's been ongoing?
Hi, Dom. Yeah, so yesterday, Putin visited Zapad 25 along with Russian Defence Minister Andrei Belosov, Deputy Defence Minister Yunusbek Yevrakov and Presidential aide Alexei Dumin. They inspected troops at the Melino training ground, which is about 200 kilometres east of Moscow. Zapad 25 is essentially a large-scale show of force by Russia and its ally Belarus. Zapad literally means west, so they're making no bones about the intended target of the intimidation. The drills include ballistic missile launches and simulated airstrikes, or wargaming, as our correspondent in Brussels, Joe Barnes, coined it. Yeah. The Kremlin said that soldiers from India, Iran, Bangladesh, Burkina Faso, Congo and Mali had taken part in the drills, a reminder of India's unravelling relations with the US, recently accelerated by the imposition of steep tariffs by Trump. India is traditionally one of the biggest customers for Russian arms, and it seems they're making their alignment clear by attending Zapad 25. It's also worth noting that Putin was wearing a military uniform, one of the few times he has done so since the outbreak of war in 2022. It's obvious he's gone full out macho for this, proper Russian strongman behaviour.
Like he didn't rip his shirt off.
Yeah, or ride a horse in the river.
Exactly.
Interestingly, as our Brussels correspondent Joe Barnes has reported, 2 US servicemen were in attendance as part of our international group of military observers. The men were greeted by Belarus's defence minister and both parties spoke in Russian, it has been reported. Nothing out of the ordinary, mainly welcome to show you around platitudes of this sort, although their defence ministry has claimed that the US presence was unexpected. Now, in all likelihood, the American presence signals a further attempt at warming relations between Washington and Minsk. This is on the back of the US taking Belarusian national airlines off the sanctions list last week. Trump has said to have wanted to reopen the American embassy in Minsk as part of a wider strategy for cultivating ties with one of Putin's closest allies. But as of yet, the American government has not commented on the soldiers' presence at Zapad 25.
I think they might be lying, but if, as the Defence Ministry claims, the US presence, these US soldiers, was unexpected, I mean, that kind of gives you cause for hope. If you can sort of sneak a few US soldiers deep inside Belarus, maybe the invasion will be easier than we expect. I don't know if there's going to be an invasion. Don't have a go at me. But interesting who wasn't there or has not been shown, Valery Gerasimov, General Valery Gerasimov, the head of Russia's armed forces, not there, not seen at Zapad 25, not seen with his big entourage with Putin. Hey, Gerasimov, Shoigu, where are you? Anyway, that's just my view and maybe echoing Mr. Prigozhin. Now then, Donald Trump is on his state visit to London. We've just watched in the last half hour or so Marine One fly through some very gloomy skies here in London today. Off to Windsor to meet the King. There's just been the Blue Red Blue out in style, Household Division, stumping around and all the rest of it. But we hear, as he's landing, he didn't make the announcement in the last 24 hours, but the news has broken in the last 24 hours that the US has just approved some funding for Ukraine via NATO, via the Pearl, which obviously Donald Trump must have approved. So, interesting times. What is this latest funding?
Yeah, so Pearl, Trump has approved the first US weapons package from Ukraine, which is funded by NATO countries. This has been told to Reuters and has just been confirmed as Trump's touchdown. These could be shipped as soon as Washington resumes sending arms to Kyiv under a new financial agreement with the allies called Pearl, which stands for Prioritized Ukraine Requirements List, as you just mentioned. And although the source declined to state an exact inventory, they said it included the air defense systems which Ukraine needs urgently, given the huge increase in drone strikes and missile attacks in the last few days by the Kremlin. This is interceptors, rockets, artillery, shortages of which remain consistent with previous months. US Undersecretary of Defense for Policy Elbridge Colby has approved as many as 2 separate $500 million shipments under this new mechanism. So it's a serious step up in terms of military aid. What's worth noting here is that this signals the first time the US is supplying Ukraine under Trump with weapons from US stocks, using funds from NATO countries. Previously, the Trump administration had only sold weapons to Ukraine or shipped donations authorized by former President Biden. I'm sure Zelensky will be relieved about this renewed commitment to transatlantic cooperation and continual supply of weapons, given his recent slightly embittered comments towards Trump in the wake of the disappointing summit in Alaska. As you spoke about yesterday, Trump's reluctance to impose stricter sanctions, the so-called secondary sanctions aimed at constricting Russia's oil export revenue, struck a personal blow to Zelensky. But his approval of this agreement here just highlights Trump's deepening frustration with Putin and his failure to achieve a negotiated end to the conflict. Trump's obviously in the UK this week on his second full state visit, which is an unprecedented move on the part of the UK government. Former presidents have only ever got one full state visit, with the red carpet and the whole shebang being rolled out just once. Today, alongside the First Lady, he'll be receiving everything the monarchy can muster by way of pomp and ceremony, including, we've got the flyover. This morning they had the procession through the Windsor grounds, and they'll then follow by a state lunch and a state banquet in the evening with the King and Queen, which is just indulging in Trump's overt fascination with the British monarchy and using again the monarchy as a form of soft power, which we have seen a lot in recent years and with such turbulent international relations. Tomorrow he gets down to politics at the bilateral meeting with Starmer at Chequers. It's expected trade deals, technology partnerships, Palestinian statehood and Ukraine will be on the agenda, although it's unlikely that such a contentious topic as the war in Ukraine will feature that highly. With Starmer fighting in-house fires and keen to keep Trump as a close ally, he will no doubt aim to keep any ruffling of Trump's infamously unpredictable feathers to a minimum.
I think that's absolutely right. I think it'd be wise to do so. The fly past is going to happen later, I think. It's the first joint British and American fly past with F-35s. The Americans are flying the F-35A, which we're buying, I think, a dozen of. We're flying the B. The weather's a bit rubbish here today, so it'll be interesting to see if that actually goes ahead. I think it probably will, but we will keep our eye on that. And then there's bands and buglers and pipers and God knows what else. Is all they're throwing everything at this, so it'll be interesting to see. However, in Ukraine, the diplomatic effort continues there. Who's the latest visitor there? Who's turning up in a train?
So we have in Ukraine the European Parliament President Roberta Metsola. She arrived in Kyiv this morning to meet with the top Ukrainian officials to discuss accession efforts, sanctions against Russia, and among other issues. This has been reported by the Kyiv Independent. Parliament Speaker Ruslan Stefanchuk welcomed Mrs. Metsola as she arrived in Ukraine's capital on her fourth visit since the start of the full-scale invasion. She wrote on X this morning, 1,300 days since the start of the aggression, I'm in Ukraine with the European Parliament's strong message of support. The EU official assured Ukrainian lawmakers of continued military, humanitarian and economic support and the EU's commitment to a just peace for Ukraine. She wrote, our position is clear, peace must be permanent, it must be based on justice and it must be based on dignity.
Fair enough, and far be it from me to tell politicians what they should or shouldn't do, but I think Ms. Metsola might be better advised to start saying 1,300 days since the start of the aggression. I think many people in Ukraine will say the aggression started at least 10 years ago, if not many more than that. But who am I to say that? Jack Lopresti is a former Member of Parliament for the Conservative Party. He was also a British Army reservist and deployed to Afghanistan in 2007. After leaving politics in 2024, he joined Ukraine's International Legion, where he still serves. I asked him about his experience of joining, the training and equipment he was given, and how his time in Parliament allows him to assess the political course of the war. Here is our conversation. So I'm delighted to be joined now by Jack Lopresti. Jack, well, I tell you what, rather than an introduction, can you take me through your journey from a Member of Parliament here in the UK to now a soldier in Ukraine's International Legion?
Well, I went out to Ukraine for the year anniversary a couple of years ago to an international conference, and I was very moved by what I saw around Ukraine. Obviously, I was appalled like everybody when the invasion happened and was very keen to get out and see for myself and see what I could do to help. So during the next 2 years in Parliament, I worked with all party groups, spoke in debates, asked questions. I formed an all-party group on sovereign defence manufacturing. My former constituency does all the procurement for Ukraine, and there's lots of industry, defence industry, and people like Babcock and Rheinmetall. So I've always had a defence interest, professionally and personally. And the plan was, if I was re-elected, I'd continue. And then about a year ago, I could see that the elections were going to be very difficult, to put it mildly. That, there was more than a prospect that I wouldn't find myself back in the House of Commons. I mean, you never know in politics, and you owe it to yourself and your supporters to fight right up to the wire, which we did and had a great campaign. But in the back of my mind, the first prospect in my 14 years that it may not work out. So I thought, well, if that were to happen, I would go to Ukraine and do what I could to help. My initial thoughts were, I'm a patron of a charity at the moment, and I supported Ukrainian Action and Ukrainian Action Heroes, which is a fantastic organisation. So I thought maybe something on those lines. But actually, if I'm really honest, deep down, I thought I'd probably end up serving in the military. I've done a little bit in military service in the past. I didn't at that stage know what sort of jobs there were and what the requirements were age-wise. I mean, I'm mid-50s now. So my plan B was an NGO or a charity, but ultimately I wanted to serve in the military. So the election went the way it did. I then spent a few months, tying everything up, dealing with offices, making sure my team was okay and getting all the loose ends tied up. And then I think it was the first week in November, I went online, the International Legion, and just applied. Spent a few hours putting in my personal details and some of the military experience I had and some of the qualifications, and then just waited to see what would happen. And it was a reasonably prompt, within a week or two, I had an acknowledgement, very professional and very positive. And then I think it was about a week after that, I had a couple of offers for interviews with 2 units. One was a training regiment and one was as a rifleman. And then I had a call from a friend of mine in the Ukrainian embassy, somebody I'd worked with over the last few years, and said, I understand you've applied to join the International Legion. And I said, well, I did mention that in July when we met not long after the election. And he said, OK, so, what are you looking to do? And I explained my background militarily, which is very sparse. I was a reservist for 6 years. It was quite a while ago. But I did serve in Afghanistan on Herrick 9 with the commandos, which was a fantastic experience. So he then said, I've got an idea. Can you come to London? And I was organising an event the following week for Ukrainian and UK defence manufacturers with some members of Parliament. And my friend turned up and we had a chat. Do you have a CV? I said, no. But I get you one by the weekend. Anyway, to cut a long story short, he then suggested I went to meet a colleague of his in Poland from the defence intelligence of the Ukrainian military. And what they wanted me to do was continue to work with UK defence manufacturers, MPs and ministers if I could, be based in Ukraine, be in the military, but continue to do that sort of work, which wasn't quite what I expected, but it was sensible, I suppose, of getting the most out of my experience and my background. And then started my service. And the 3 aspects, if you like, the 3 elements I focus on are international relations, a bit of diplomacy from time to time, visiting delegations. One of the first jobs I had was to accompany some UK parliamentarians on a delegation, which was quite fun and interesting. Military procurement, obviously. I mean, this morning we had a meeting again with some current MPs, defence contractors, SMEs, mainly focusing on the drone element, and still doing a bit of work for a charity. When I return to Ukraine, I'll be driving a vehicle for Ukrainian Action.
Can you talk to us about that basic training then? So what kind of equipment is standard issue? Because we get a lot of letters from people saying that they've had to buy their own kit.
Well, I don't know what it was like in the beginning, and you have to understand, I guess, the circumstances in which this all arose. A shock invasion, very quick, and obviously then the call for volunteers. But now, as far as I can understand from what I saw, the men and women are very much in a military environment. They're wearing uniform. It reminded me of when I did my training as a reservist. They were living outside, almost like a hut or barracks. They were doing trench digging. They were doing target practice. It was basic military skills from what I could see. The kit and equipment I've received, uniform, boots, helmet, some body armour, it's all been really high quality, actually.
That's great to hear. That's not the universal story that we do hear. A lot of people say to us that the kit is not great or not there, and people take their own. And we've heard stories that people have recommended. Actually, in many ways, it's better to take money and buy your stuff in Kyiv and elsewhere where it's cheaper. We also had one comment from somebody who was this is in response to a listener who wrote in saying that their friend had just joined the International Legion and what advice would be given should she give to her friend. And one of the comments was, don't join the International Legion, but join one of the other Ukrainian brigades. I asked, but I didn't go into detail about why not. Do you think your experience of good kit and a training pipeline, is that usual?
I'm working with Ukrainians. I'm not really working with foreign volunteers, but I do meet them, talk to them when they come through Kyiv. I don't know what it was like in the beginning, but obviously, as you say, starting from scratch, total war scenario, it must have been really difficult. But my experience, it's all very, very good quality now, genuinely.
And what about the men and women joining? Where are they coming from? The countries they're coming from, and what's their motivation?
Well, there were mainly Brits, but there were a few Americans. Their motivation is a desire to serve and realising that this is more than just about Ukraine. It's about Europe, the Western world. And I think from what I can see, there's a genuine desire to serve and do what they can. I met a young woman who was training. She was going to go off to a unit to be a medic. That was fairly typical. There are others who had skills. There was an older guy, even older than me, believe it or not, from the south of England, who was going to be he didn't look that fit, if I'm honest. I hope he doesn't hear this and realise I'm talking about him. But he had some military experience, and he was going to work in logistics in stores, and he was very happy to do that. He wanted to go and make a contribution. He was right on the cusp of the age limit. I couldn't see him running across a field with a big pack or anything like that. But he was actually doing the training, to be fair. The next morning we were digging trenches and he was mucking and getting stuck in. But again, he found a role which he could do, and he was happy to make his contribution, which I thought was great.
Partly with your former parliamentary hat on, if I may, there have been reports in the last few months of a centralisation of power in Ukraine, largely by necessity, but some criticisms of President Zelensky for trying to draw power in and to rely on trusted advisors and perhaps not listen to Parliament as much as he may do. How supported is he still by the military?
Oh, as far as I can tell, and absolutely. He's got the absolute loyalty and support from not only the military but the Ukrainian people. And I think the way he was treated when he went to Washington, and I think that's only solidified the support he has. So he's in a very good position. He's an amazingly inspirational figure, historic figure. And no, I don't see any evidence of any criticism or. The morale is incredibly high. It's a united country, and he's doing an amazing job, I think. But I don't get involved. In a sense, I've deliberately switched off from the politics, even though when I meet people about non-political things, and my background and job comes up, I don't get involved in any discussions about internal Ukrainian politics.
But you are an interlocutor.
Yeah, of course.
So people are going to want to know what they're investing in.
Sure, but as I say, I'm really happy and confident from what I can see as far as morale and the respect that the president's held in, that it's very united, and the morale is astonishing, actually.
And General Zaluzhny, he and General Syrsky, it seemed like very different characters. Is Zaluzhny still spoken of? Do people sort of either remember the good old days or hope to have him back? Or?
Well, I'm in my own mindset of, I'm a soldier, I'm there to serve, but I don't sort of get involved, as I say, and I know I'm not talking about politics per se, but, I'm there as a volunteer and I do my job and I don't really get drawn into those sort of discussions. But I operate and I'm very comfortable because it's a very positive environment. I don't see any backbiting or any negativity. It's all about the task and the job, which is huge. And there probably isn't much time for anything else, to be honest.
Your knowledge of MOD, the Defence Select Committee or more broadly, do you think British MOD is culturally set up, able to learn the lessons from Ukraine and adapt accordingly? I'm thinking of the speed of innovation.
Yes, and, I understand that some parliamentarians met with the procurement minister to talk about this very subject. It's something a lot of us have been pushing for and talking about and working on. The Ukrainians are leading the world on this sort of new warfare, drone warfare. And whilst we want and will continue to support them, they can teach us a hell of a lot. Some Ukrainian drone manufacturers are using our supply chain to a degree for components, but not much. I mean, Ukraine built 3 million drones last year. They're going to do 5 million. It's huge what they're doing. It's keeping them, in the fight. I think there is an open-mindedness. There's an understanding that warfare has evolved. We are going to have to learn, and we will support. And I think it will benefit us and Ukraine in the long term.
I wonder about the speed of innovation that Ukraine has had to go through and has gone through. I can't see, from what I know of DENS, I just can't see it happening. I can't see the processes being shortened. I can't see the risk being taken. I can't see the authorities being delegated to the level that it would need to be to innovate at the speed Ukraine has. Do you have confidence that?
Yes, I do. And I think if you look at what we've seen in our previous careers as people who've served, when there are urgent operational requirements, things move very, very quickly, as they did in Iraq and Afghanistan. I mean, when you even during those deployments, the sort of evolution of kit and the way we operated changed quite rapidly towards the end of the conflict to what we began with. I am very confident that we will be able to, and we are, changing the mindset, encouraging innovation. So yes, I think without a doubt. And it's a collaboration between industry and the MOD, but I'm very, very keen to start proper joint working because that will change the culture.
So you are a soldier in the International Legion, not a parliamentarian any longer. No. However, I detect a whiff of ambition. So for a moment, I'm going to make you Shadow Defence Secretary. Oh, wow. Can you mark John Healey's scorecard, please, since he's been Defence Secretary here with the new Labour government? He's got a lot on his plate.
I am very proud of what the government is doing and set out to do. We had that 100-year agreement a couple of months ago. I worry about the amount we're spending on defence as far as our plans for the future. I know we're all waiting for the defence review, but this coalition of the willing, this peacekeeping operation, with all our other responsibilities, I think we're going to come up against financial pressure and tough decisions will have to be made because where we are currently won't be enough.
Largely driven by the nuclear enterprise, the sheer cost of it. Do you think that should be taken out of the defence budget?
Well, I think the Conservatives, when I was in Parliament, put it in the 2%, the NATO figure. That, in a sense, is you're talking about an accounting trick, really. But I think if we've got to have a serious conversation with ourselves as a nation, we want to be a global power. We want to help Ukraine. We've pledged and we will help Ukraine. I think we're going to have to spend a lot more money on defence.
And just finally, you mentioned serious conversations there that we're going to have with ourselves. Do you think we're still able to have serious conversations with our US colleagues? What's the risk of this?
As well, they're capable of having serious conversations with us, frankly, at the moment. I'm just astonished by the whole thing, really. What the Americans have to realise, and I don't think they understand, the battle lines, the borders haven't really changed much in 2 years. When you consider what was thrown at them, especially in the first few months, they've pushed that back and they've held the line. So they are not losing and they can continue to fight, and they will do. They will not. I mean, as far as, what peace looks like, importantly, that Ukraine remains a sovereign country and self-determinate, a democracy and everything else, but also the ability to defend itself. And if they want UK troops or German troops, they should be allowed to do that. So the Americans need to wake up to the fact that they will not be able to impose their terms on Ukraine. Morale is incredibly high, and they're prepared to carry on fighting for as long as it takes, and they're doing well.
Thanks for talking to us.
Thanks for having me.
There's a couple of final thoughts, if I may. We, the UTL team, we're having another event, another sort of in-person event. We're having a big discussion and a question and answer session at the Honourable Artillery Company here in central London, just up by Old Street. It's going to be on the 22nd of October, starting about 7 p.m. There is a, it's the HAC, so there's a cash bar, but we have a drink beforehand, and then we've got a panel. Adley is going to be running the panel, and Franco and I will be there. We're also going to be joined by General Sir Richard Barrons, former head of Joint Forces Command here in the UK. He's also one of the 3 authors of the Strategic Defence Review that came out just a few weeks ago here in the UK. And the other panel member is Orysia Lutsevich. You'll remember her. She's been on other panel events. She's been on the pod as well. She's the head of the Ukraine Forum at the Chatham House think tank. Now, to be fair, I'm on the edge of my jigsaw at this point. I don't understand the tech. So it's not open just for subscribers. Anybody can get a ticket. There's not that many, only a few hundred, I believe. I think they are priced at 35 quid, but that might be wrong. Anyway, you can get the tickets at telegraph.co.uk/UkraineLive, all one word. We'll put the link in the episode notes. Now, as I say, I don't really understand the tech. If you unscrew a light bulb, I don't understand why electricity doesn't drip out. So that's the level we're talking. But it's possible you might have to register to the Telegraph to read the article within which the link is. Don't worry, registering isn't, you're not paying any money or anything like that. You're not going to go through the subscriptions paywall or anything like that. Any questions about not being able to access this, send questions to ukrainelive@telegraph.co.uk. But anyway, 22nd of October in central London. Let's have a nice chat. We'll have a drink afterwards in the superb surroundings of the HAC, the Honourable Artillery Company, one of the oldest units in British military history. The ground gifted by Henry VIII. It's right in the centre of London, and they've got their own polo pitch. It's absolutely enormous. It's amazing. They've got their own castle. They live in a castle. I'm supposed to go over there, or I am going over there this afternoon to put some finishing touches to the plans for this event. Obviously, I've forgotten my jacket and tie today, so they're not letting me in. We've rearranged. We're meeting in a pub round the corner. There we go. Anyway, that's my final thought. Eliza, any final thoughts today?
Well, they're not quite as fun as that, but I was just going to round up on, I think, what we've talked about today in terms of the diplomatic situation. It's very clear that both sides are showing strength, but at the same time, the spectacle of Zapad 25, which will be winding down, and Trump's state visit do reveal the fragility of the current alignments. Trump is doing a sort of strange balance between his reluctance on sanctions with also new aid to Ukraine in partnership with NATO, and then also cozying up to the royal family. It just sets up the scene for whether Europe and the US can sustain cohesion in the face of Russian provocation. And I think that will be the crucial question in the coming weeks.
Thanks, Eliza. It certainly will be, yes. And we are not going anywhere. We'll be here to chat through all of that. Thank you. Thanks for joining us today. A lovely debut. And I should point people to your podcast.
My podcast,
Your
yes.
podcast, yes. My second favourite podcast. The History of Heartbreak podcast, which I think is fascinating.
It's an unusual name. It is currently only 7 episodes. It's on Spotify, and it's about history of tumultuous relationships and maybe sometimes where they've been misconstrued in popular imagination.
And rather brilliantly, you've done an episode on Napoleon and Josephine, and even more brilliantly, Francis isn't here to get all excited about it. So I've got the drop on him there. But you told me earlier on in terms of heartbreak, what were Napoleon's last words on his deathbed?
Well, without giving him too much credit, it does sound like he was very loyal both to his ex-wife and to his country. It was France, Josephine, the army.
There we go. France, Josephine, the army. Well, it's a shame you're not here, Francis. I can see you lurking there in the back of the space. Shame you're not here to ask more questions about Napoleon. But no, do go and have a listen to the History of Heartbreak podcast to hear more about that and others. Cleopatra, who's massively misunderstood, apparently.
Yes.
Thanks, folks. We'll be back again tomorrow, same time, same place, 1 o'clock London time. Do join us if you can. I wish you all the very best from a very gloomy London, but from the Telegraph newspaper here in the centre of town, I wish you a very good afternoon. Ukraine the Latest is an original podcast from The Telegraph, created by David Knowles. To support our work and stay on top of all of our Ukraine news, analysis and dispatches from the ground, please subscribe to The Telegraph. You can get 1 month free, then 2 months for just £1 at www.telegraph.co.uk/Ukraine the Latest. Deploying cutting-edge technology, we also release Ukrainian and Russian versions of this podcast. These translations retain our voices and delivery so that it can reach listeners in every region of Ukraine and those parts of Eastern Europe where Russian is still widely spoken. Links to those can be found in the podcast description to this episode. You can also now sign up to the new Ukraine the Latest weekly newsletter. Each week, Francis and I answer your questions, provide recommended reading, and give exclusive analysis and behind-the-scenes insights, plus maps of the front lines and diagrams of weapons, to complement our daily reporting. It's free for everyone, including non-subscribers. You can find the link to sign up in the descriptions for this episode. We regularly have a Ukraine live blog on our website where you can follow updates as they come in throughout the day, including insights from regular contributors to this podcast. We also do the same for other breaking international stories. If you appreciate our work, please consider following Ukraine the Latest on your preferred podcast app and leave us a review, as it really helps others find the show. Please also share it with those who may not be aware we exist. You can listen to this conversation live at 1 p.m. London time each weekday on X Spaces. Follow the Telegraph so that you don't miss it. You can also get in touch directly to ask questions or give comments by emailing ukrainepod@telegraph.co.uk. We continue to read every message. You can also contact us directly on X. You'll find our handles in the description for this episode. As ever, we're especially interested to hear where you're listening from around the world. Ukraine the Latest was today produced by Rachel Porter. Executive producers are Francis Durnley, Louisa Wells and David Knowles.
My name is David Knowles. Thank you all for listening. Goodbye.